Five. Sorry.
4, 3, 2, 1. CTS podcast. We're back after an extended hiatus.
You know, we say that every time, though.
Yeah, we got to be more consistent. That's our bad. Jace's bad.
Lots of things have happened in the past few weeks. I think the one thing that I think we should start off with, because this one hits close to home, is Mike Lee went on Tucker Carlson and was begging for Romney's endorsement. And I just find it so funny because if you remember, you know, Republicans had completely ostracized him from the party after his voting.
Yeah, after the Trump thing.
And now you have Mike Lee, begging. It's like, it was actually kind of sad to watch. It was like, you know,
please, I would implore Mitt Romney, if he doesn't want to elect a Democrat to the Senate, I would implore him to come out and support my campaign. Pretty bad. On Tucker Carlson, too.
Yeah, it was certainly a little bit weird. And on that same note, we have Tulsi Gabbard that says she's leaving the Democratic Party, which to me, you know, I saw it making the rounds as far as news, but I guess I just don't see the big deal because, I mean, she's not going to win if she doesn't run as a Democrat in Hawaii.
I used to like her. She's been saying some weird stuff.
Really? Exactly, yeah.
Like when she came out and was like, the Democrats are run by an elitist cabal or something like that, I was like, all right, Tulsi, this is getting a little weird. It kind of the same thing with Yang. They both did the little Joe Rogan thing and went a little crazy.
Yeah. Well, and Tulsi, she's been saying some real weird stuff for a while. I mean, the stuff with the stuff with Ukraine started, and you know, she was like, you know, everyone, Congress is a bunch of warmongers and all this. And I don't know, I guess if you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago if I would agree, well, I think Congress is a bunch of warmongers, but I guess I don't necessarily agree with the point that we shouldn't be sending anything to Ukraine. It's like,
yeah. It's also weird. Like, is that really the right time? Because it's not like anything one person came out and said. It's not like she was going to come out and say something and change people's minds on sending aid to Ukraine. So it's weird to be like, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird position to take.
well, and it's a pretty bipartisan issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Too,
Supporting Ukraine is like kind of pretty good across the board. Is tracking well with constituents everywhere. So to come out and say, no, we shouldn't do it. And even, especially because that was like the initial one, right? When they initially decided to send stuff over. I get a little bit more when people are like, over and over again stuff's getting sent, that people are like, okay, like when, like where does it stop or whatever. But yeah, on the first one, that was pretty much universally, everyone was kind of said, yeah, we have to do something here.
Well, and, you know, sort of people are reporting that the Pentagon is setting Ukraine up for fighting for decades, like years and years and years and years and years and years. It could do. I don't know. I guess
I don't think Putin has that long left. I think if Putin either was no longer in power or like died so he was no longer in power, I think it would end immediately. I mean, all the reports are that his top aides don't agree with it.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder if you end it now. If I'm a Russian citizen, it's like, well, you've been diverting all of this economic power to fund this war in Ukraine. It's time for a new government. I don't know. I guess.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, right? Either, I think if Putin, that's why I just don't think it can last for decades.
I don't think so either. Like,
it's not going to be like Afghanistan.
He actually looks a lot more feeble than he used to. I don't know if you've seen him as of late, but he definitely doesn't look like
Well, and I mean, he's old. Like, he's not. It's not.
How old is he?
He's not. I think he's 70 or something. He's not a young dude. So, I don't know.
He's 70. You're right on the dot.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I feel like it. I don't think it's setting itself up to be something ultra long term.
But how does it end? You're saying it only ends with Putin dying?
No, I think you could like cut your losses.
See, I disagree.
Eventually.
I don't think he can back out without.
So you're saying that it only ends with him dying?
Or winning.
But I don't think he can win.
Or reclaiming Ukraine.
I don't think he can win.
Well, he's backed into kind of like an area between a rock and a hard place because he's got. Let's say that, for example, he deploys nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, which I think would turn the tide of the war in Russia's favor. I don't think NATO responds with nuclear weapons. Point blank period.
Really?
I think that Russia could launch 3 nuclear strikes on Ukraine. I do not think NATO would respond with nuclear strikes on Russian territory. Because I just don't think NATO's interested in a nuclear proliferation over Ukraine. I don't think anyone in NATO thinks that Ukraine is that important. Now, if we were talking about Russia launching nuclear strikes on a NATO member state, I would think, yeah, I think they would respond by nuking Russia.
But do you think there's no response if Russia launches nuclear weapons?
I actually think the U.S. will put like forces on the ground.
But I think that ends it for Russia. If the U.S. engaged in force against Russia, would end it. And then, like, Russia to respond would have to directly attack like U.S. troops, and that would certainly draw a nuclear response from the U.S.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there is a way for Russia to win without getting NATO involved. I don't think Ukraine can hold on forever. I think that Western Europe is going to back off as we get closer to winter on some of these sanctions. They're claiming that they won't back off, but I mean, Germany, for example, who is so reliant on Russian gas, I don't see how they can hold on for much longer. I guess I just don't see how NATO can continue to fund this war until Putin dies. I mean, they've got to back off at some point. I don't know. I don't know what the next step is from here. Because I just don't see a way where anyone really wins. If Putin were to back out right now and just cut his losses and say, we're coming back home, spreading a bunch of propaganda about how they did. I did see there was one guy that was being interviewed on like MSNBC, and he was essentially saying Putin could back off today. His opinion was Putin could back off today. He could go back to Russia and claim victory. He could say, we destabilized the country. We essentially forced our, NATO had forced our hand. We came in. It took all of this money from the West in order for Ukraine to hold on for months, and he could come back and he could win over the public. But I disagree. I think that if Putin goes back to Russia without complete victory in Ukraine, I think the government is overthrown. I think he's gone. I don't think he would hold on for long, and a new leader would be instated, whether that means Putin retires or something of that nature. But it's a weird situation.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we could, like, NATO / the U.S. could probably fund Ukraine for quite a while.
Oh, I think we could. I think there's no doubt that we could. I don't think that we should, I guess is what I'm saying.
So, do you think we would? I think we would. Yeah, I think we would.
I think they would, and they will. I don't think.
So at that point, I think there's no way Russia wins, right? If we're going to continue funding Ukraine, and at some point, I think before we go and just entirely back off, I think we go, okay, we're just going to like end this. I think that's the decision is, oh, we've already sunk this much, which is a fallacy, like is not the way you should think about it. Like, we've already sunk this much into it, but I think the U.S. would just end things before
You would think, but we didn't in Vietnam, right? We went to Vietnam. We spent billions and billions and billions, including U.S. troops. We were engaged in a much more powerful way in Vietnam. We took our L and then we went back home.
It's a little different, right? Because they held the border, right? I don't think the U.S.'s plan is to take Russia, right?
No, I don't think that's their plan.
I mean, they held a border between, as much as like you can say the U.S. lost the Vietnam War, but they didn't like lose all of South Vietnam. So I just can't imagine a situation where the U.S. and I would argue the U.S. has only grown more powerful and the people they're fighting against weaker. Like Russia's certainly weaker now than almost any time in the past or the recent past.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I think, you say I think NATO would just come in and just end things. I think that would most certainly draw a nuclear response from Russia. I think that Russia would not hesitate to use nuclear weapons if, for example, NATO were to start launching strategic bombing operations in Ukraine, or they were to I think funding the war is different than being engaged in the war. I think if NATO became engaged in the war, I think that Russia would respond with nuclear weapons.
But I think but then Russia would be like done for, right?
You would think, but I don't think NATO would get. I don't think NATO.
If NATO had troops if NATO had troops on the ground and Russia launched nuclear weapons,
I don't think we'll ever put troops on the ground.
But isn't that what you were just saying?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if NATO were to, well, what do you mean? You said NATO would end the war at a point where we were funding this operation for so long. If push came to shove, NATO would end the war. What would you define as NATO ending the war?
Like troops on the ground. I'm saying troops on the ground.
Oh, I guess I would disagree. I don't think we'll ever put troops on the ground in Ukraine. But I could be wrong. I mean, the United States is... I can't see it. I can't see it being done.
But I think I think where we disagree is I think the longer it lasts, the less likely Russia is to win.
No, I would agree. I think the longer it lasts, the less likely Russia is to win.
I think my point would be that as a result of that, the longer it lasts, the more likely it is that Russia uses nuclear weapons.
I would also agree with that. I think Russia is already on, I think those conversations have already been held in Russia.
But would you say if Russia used nuclear weapons, do you think NATO countries would deploy troops?
I think they would deploy troops. I don't think they'd use nuclear weapons. Now, if Russia were to use nuclear weapons, and let's say that they were to hit a U.S. Army base based in Kyiv, I think the U.S.
So does Russia
would respond.
Use nuclear weapons once, and then NATO puts troops on the ground, and then Russia just goes, okay, we're not going to use nuclear weapons anymore?
I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say because if they open the door for using nuclear weapons, I can't imagine they're going to. A lot of people think they're going to force. A lot of people think they are going to use nuclear weapons, but they're only going to use 2 or 3, and they're going to be strategic nuclear weapons that are hitting a power plant or hitting some machinery depot, and they're going to use them in that sense, and then they're going to say we're done. I tend to think that if Russia uses nuclear weapons, they're saying, just so you know, we plan to use more, and they're going to continue using them. I mean, their nuclear arsenal is probably the only real piece of military equipment they have that can compete with NATO on any level.
And, I mean, even then, I don't think they can compete with, all of NATO.
No, I don't think they can compete with all of NATO, but I think it would spell the destruction of Europe if we were to get into a nuclear proliferation with Russia.
Yeah, I
don't think it would spell the end of the United States, because I don't think I guess I just haven't seen a lot of weaponry that's capable of being launched from Russia to the United States, intercontinental ballistic missiles that I just don't think it would spell the destruction of the United States. But
you couldn't launch enough quickly enough before the U.S. responds.
Now, if we're talking about Russia launching nuclear weapons on, say, like Denmark, France,
but
Germany,
I think you get the same response from NATO as a bloc, no matter where.
For sure.
Just an instant
if they were to launch nuclear weapons on, say, Poland, which borders Ukraine, I think it would. I think it would instantly open the door for nuclear weapons to be used, say, like in Moscow.
Yeah.
In other news, OPEC, which is
we got to talk about this.
This is really interesting.
Crazy one.
OPEC, which essentially controls the world's supply of gasoline, or the vast majority of the world's supply of gasoline.
Kind of the conglomerate, like a cartel.
Saudi Arabia, Russia, a lot of these Middle Eastern states, some South American states met and decided to raise fuel prices. And the administration instantly responded and said, we can see this. We believe that this was, I can't remember the exact words they used, but they were essentially saying we see this as an act of aggression against the United States, which to me is okay. That's a little bit dicey to use that word, but reports have been coming out that the Biden administration had requested the OPEC meeting to be pushed back and delayed a month until after the midterms, which is insane. Because at that point, it literally shows that they don't care about the American people.
They just care about
the optics and getting reelected.
The other weird thing about that is I saw an interview with, I think it was on the BBC, and it was a BBC reporter speaking with someone from the Biden administration, and the reporter said, basically, the Saudi government has come out and said that you requested they push back this meeting by a month until after the midterms. And he said, why is that true? He just asked, is that true? Yes or no?
And he refused to
answer. He kind of just danced around it, said, well, we want to do what's in the best interest of the American people. And the reporter kind of he's almost in disbelief that, and he goes, so is this true? Because if you're either saying it's that yes, it is true, and you won't tell us, or the
Saudis are lying.
Yeah, the Saudi government's lying. And the guy kind of dances around it again, and the reporter makes the point, well, we all know why you did this, like with the midterms coming up. And so it's crazy. That's bad. That's really bad. And it's not getting publicized as much as you'd think.
No. And it's dumb because this brings up a good point about like Fox News, for example, or Tucker Carlson, which is the biggest, sort of celebrity on Fox News at this point, or Hannity, for example. Instead of talking about real issues like that I think really could hurt the Democrats, they bring on like Tulsi Gabbard to talk about this elitist cult running the Democratic Party and how, all of these non-issues are really issues. But it's like you have all of this really good source material in front of you and you just don't even talk about it.
My only argument to that is, do you think anybody that's like on the fence in the middle is what really consuming Fox News?
No.
So you kind of, I don't think something like that's going to sway somebody or you're not, Fox News' goal isn't to sway people. It's just to appeal to their already kind of staunchly right-wing base.
Yeah, I guess there's not really any real good neutral news outlets left though, right? Because CNN used to be, and they're not anymore, certainly. MSNBC, same thing. Fox News, no. NPR, even, no. BBC, I think, is pretty good, but it's not a lot of, like, U.S. politics stuff. But it's certainly interesting that they, instead of, they're essentially saying, just raise fuel prices.
My litmus test is, what would the reaction be if Trump did it? Like, what would the CNN headline be if Trump did it?
Yeah.
They'd be calling for impeachment.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Dude, I think I'm so excited for the midterms. I was, after watching Mike Lee just completely fumble on that interview,
So
I was like, oh, I want this guy
you
to
know what
lose
else
so
is
bad.
crazy about that? Is he didn't come out and support Romney. He didn't back Romney
Yeah.
when Romney was getting elected. So why? I don't get it. It doesn't even make sense. And I think it's funny because clearly not endorsing Mike Lee is basically an endorsement of McMullen.
Yeah, and you had brought up how, we think that if Romney were to come out and endorse McMullen today, we think the race would certainly become much tighter.
Well, there's pretty decent polls that have McMullen leading.
Yeah, and the ones that we saw, for example, it was usually 5 points, but there were some that it was really, really close.
And I was looking at the 538 one, and the way 538 does it is they aggregate a bunch of polls, and there were and it was not evenly split. Certainly more of the polls had Mike Lee winning than had McMullen winning, but those ones were pretty close. And then there were 4 or 5 polls that had Mike Lee ahead by 13 or 14 points. That it was oh, that might be swaying the kind of results of the overall 538 conglomerate a little bit. But I don't know. Polls, it's a little hard to read into because they're so... How is it possible that one poll is getting consistently... I don't know. Polls shouldn't consistently be getting opposite results if you're doing your due diligence on the polling. But it would be a crazy one.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of any other crazy things that have sort of happened. There's been a lot of debates recently between Senate candidates.
A lot of people turning down debates.
Yeah, dude, you know what we should talk about? Have you seen, are you familiar at all with the Fetterman versus Oz Senate race?
That's a weird race. They both seem like caricatures,
Yeah.
not real politicians.
So Fetterman gave his first real interview since after his stroke, and a lot of people have been pointing to, his health and that he's not going to really be fit
in a good
to be in office.
Yeah.
Which, a lot of people say, oh, that's so ableist, or oh, that's inappropriate to bring up his health. But I completely disagree. Health is something that if you're going to,
it's not crazy yet to.
It's very valid to bring up
because the
someone's
repercussions of a serious health issue is we get an unelected official.
Right. So it's completely valid to bring up health concerns. And he was interviewed by, I believe, CNN or someone at CNN. It might not have been, though, so don't mark my words on that. But, and the interviewer was asking questions, and you could tell that he couldn't understand them until he had to read the questions on a monitor, a written monitor, because he just has his auditory processing skills are gone.
Really?
And the interviewer on this more left-wing news outlet, was saying, yeah, we were trying to, we were engaging in small talk. She said this on air. We were engaging in small talk, and I was trying to talk through some things with him, and you could tell that he just wasn't understanding me.
Really? That's crazy. Well, what was the other thing I saw about him?
When he was mayor, how he chased down that guy with a
shotgun?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I saw. And hasn't apologized for it.
No.
Refuses to apologize for it.
Yeah, that one's pretty crazy. And he was called out by his fellow Democratic
I think that's
contenders.
what I saw, yeah.
And now Dr. Oz is really closing the gap.
Dr. Oz, that's a weird one.
Dr.
Oz could be...
And he's a fraud, first of all. He's a total TV fraud. He's a real doctor. I'm sure he's a really smart guy, but he's a fraud. And you can see that in the episodes. This new miracle diet pill will lead you to lose 45 pounds in 3 weeks.
It's kind of a weird one. it's a name like I feel like I'd always heard and then never really knew like who he actually was. It's like, oh, well, he's running for office. Like, what is his show about? And it's all these fake kind of like infomercial, 2 a.m. infomercial type things. And yeah, I don't know. That's a weird one. What about what's happening in Florida? DeSantis isn't up for election this year, right?
He is.
He is.
Yeah.
It's not really close, right? It doesn't look like.
Well, let's look.
Because I thought that was one that people were talking about could be close this year. And
so I think it is somewhat close. Let's just see what it looks like. So, for example, they're polling in most places within. See, this is, for example, to your point about 538. DeSantis is up 9 points in this poll. They're tied in this poll. DeSantis is up 8 points in this poll. Christ is up 6 points in this poll.
Yeah, it's hard.
And DeSantis is up 7 points. So it looks like it's gonna lean Republican, for sure. So I think DeSantis is gonna be safe, and then I think he's obviously going to be running in 2024.
So what happens? Because how long is, and this is me, is governor?
Depends on the state, but typically 4 years.
So does he step down midway through?
It depends. Some of them have stayed governor.
Right up until like if they get elected.
Yeah, or I think until they win the nomination usually.
Okay.
But yeah, some of them have stayed governor. So for example, like, California Governor Gavin Newsom, probably going to be the same thing. He'll stay governor up until he wins the nomination, at which point he might drop out. But like I said, some of them just stay.
That's kind of crazy.
The whole time.
Seems like, I mean, the campaign trail is brutal. Like, how can you do your job as governor while campaigning for president?
Yeah, Chris Christie was governor of New Jersey when he ran, and he stayed governor of New Jersey, and then he was called out by Marco Rubio for not returning to his state when there was like a big bridge debacle or something like that. Big bridge fell down, like collapsed or something.
Oh yeah,
weird.
I remember that.
But yeah, kind of interesting.
I'm trying to think anything else we've missed over the last little bit. It's easier when we do it consistently because you just get the few news stories that pop up in a week. Snowden was
given Russian citizenship, so he's really safe now. If he wasn't safe before, he's safe now, because now,
you can just
for example,
kick it in Russia.
The CIA can't just stage a automobile accident in Russia anymore. Now that he's a Russian citizen, he's got a lot more protections than I think he did before, which is kind of interesting. Oh, this is really interesting. So with the OPEC announcement, the U.S. there's reports that the U.S. are going to seek to open serious dialogue with Venezuela and Iran for their oil supply, which is kind of crazy. A lot of people are calling the U.S. to, kind of back down from their relationship with the Saudis, which is not a very good relationship for us since the get-go, other than for the oil that they provide. And for example, I think when Trump was president, he always used to say, oh, I could call the Saudis and they would do whatever I told them. He would say that in interviews and stuff. But I mean, he completely overlooked the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, which I think you probably used that as a negotiating tool. Like, I'll overlook this.
To be fair, it seems like a lot of people did. Like, that's kind of gone away.
Yeah.
Which is a crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
Killed in a Turkish embassy, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
They cut up his body into pieces and took him away in a briefcase.
Yeah. Wild. But.
Well, should we wrap this episode up?
Let's call this one
CTS Podcast, episode 63.